All right.
Hey everybody. So, welcome to our YouTube Live parenting class. We're excited to be here with you guys.
Yep, we are using some new technology in attempting this live stream, and everything was really good until like 8 minutes ago, and then the world came crashing down. So,
Yep.
if we experience some loss of connection, bear with us, and we will get back up online as soon as possible.
Yep. So tonight, just real quick, to give you guys the introduction of what we're planning on doing, our goal, we're shooting for about 45 minutes or so, with some time that you guys can ask us some questions at the end. Our goal is not to present ourselves as some kind of expert parents. First of all, we've been doing this for only a couple of years now that we've been parents, and so for me, obviously, I don't have some kind of great pool of parenting experience to share with you. We're not here to tell you the right way to parent, because there's no such thing. What we're here to do is to talk about some things that we have been taught, some things that we have observed, and some ways that maybe we can respond to it that would help our kids to have better mental health and prepare for some of the challenges that they're going to go through as they continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so over the next 5 or 6 weeks, we've got 4 of these that are going to happen. 2 of them are on mental health, and then the other 2 are something called tech support. So we're going to be talking about technology and how as parents you can navigate that in a way that is healthy for your kids, because I know it's a question that we both get asked all the time, and there will be some overlap between these 2 things, but I think a lot of it is going to be really helpful information for you guys, and this is just going to be really conversational. The stuff we'll talk about is probably nothing that you couldn't just look up yourself, but we all know that everyone's busy, and so we've been talking about this for several months and actually been compiling our research over these past few months, and thought that we would share it with you. And so I was going to say something else about that. I think there's something powerful to be said about going through something like this, like together as a Christ-centered community, because we're all thinking of it at the same time and kind of processing this together, and it gives us an opportunity to kind of feel like, hey, we're all in this together. It does take a village, and so yeah,
Sure. We're all in this together, just like High School Musical.
Better than High School Musical.
Okay, so like Zach said earlier, if for some reason our connection should drop, right now it's showing that our stream health is not very great. For some reason our internet's just decided to be a little bit slow tonight, which is kind of out of our hands. So if something like that happens, or if our battery dies or something, bear with us. We're going to do whatever we can to get it back up and running as fast as possible. If I have to do the Heimlich on Zach, I'll try not to crack a rib.
I'll swallow my coffee down like the wrong tube, Oh, it says we're offline.
Yep, that's all right. It keeps coming on and turning off and coming back. Hopefully you're still with us. Okay, so the good news is, if you guys are still here, we are recording this as well. We're not just doing this as a stream. Mm-hmm. So if for some reason something goes out, we'll try to keep rolling along, and then we'll make sure that we get this back up and going again, and then hopefully we'll be able to do some troubleshooting based off of this and get it better for the next few, so that we can have some better success. So anyway. You want to go ahead and dive in with our first topic?
Yeah, so this part 1 of mental health is really more of history and awareness, and then next week when we do part 2, it'll be more of the practical side, and some things that you can do as parents. And so first off, it's kind of important just to note some big cultural shifts that have happened, especially in the last decade, that has contributed to this, what a lot of people are calling the mental health crisis amongst adolescents, youth, and all that kind of stuff. One of them obviously would be the development of the smartphone and other technology like that, and how that has changed mindsets a lot when it comes to kids growing up, as well as us.
Yep.
And there's lots of cultural hot buttons where we're told not to push specific stereotypes on our kids and all that kind of stuff. But where then is the role of affirmation and that kind of thing, our roles as parents when it comes to that? We have a very Yelp culture where we're just taught to kind of point out what's wrong with everything without necessarily trying to be a part of the solution. and that leads to some issues. But there's also just a heightened pressure on students to perform wherever they're at, whether it be with the sport that they're involved in or whatever extracurricular, or even sometimes at church, the expectation on them to perform, putting on their smiling face and their Sunday best. We even experience that still some as adults, but just the heightened need to perform even on social media, and put on a persona, and that mixed within just the craziness of the modern schedule leaves students with that heightened pressure in a lack of emotional support, often on the home front as well because of those things. So that's kind of where we're at, and some changes that have happened in the last 10 years that have been more significant when it comes to contributing to the health of our kids.
Absolutely. And hold on, I'm getting a weird, my notes are showing up funny on my phone. Let me refresh them. Okay, they're back. So as Zach said, there's kind of two things that we think really contribute to the state of mental health, and a few kind of ways that things have changed. And I think the two most critical are culture has changed in the way that it addresses mental health, and technology has changed in the way that it impacts mental health. So first things first, as you know, we're right now in the middle of our series Fight Club here at Victory, and we're addressing some of the cultural stereotypes with masculinity and manhood. Toxic masculinity is a phrase that you hear thrown out a whole lot in culture, and certainly at its core, if you look at the definition of how people define toxic masculinity, sure, it is bad. Certainly violence toward women or aggression toward women is very inappropriate. Certainly sexualizing the opposite sex, things like this are inappropriate. But I think the problem is that sometimes culture pushes us to take that a step too far. And instead of telling us that we need to treat each other with kindness, that we need to treat each other equally, they've instead said that there's no difference between male and female, that there's something wrong with being either traditionally masculine or maybe being a guy who's not traditionally masculine. And they like to put labels on things and affect the way that we treat stuff.
And that happens with more than just gender roles. That happens just with no matter what kind of polarizing issue you are talking about. That's where you're told to be on one extreme or the other, and there's no middle ground. There's no there's a for and against kind of mindset.
Absolutely. And I think culture has really pushed for adults and parents not to put labels on their kids, that they want them not to tell their kids what they should enjoy, not to tell their kids what they should do, not to set certain boundaries, not to tell them even things like gender roles. And to an extent, as a younger parent, I appreciate some of those ideas with the fact that, I'm an artist, I enjoy video games, my kids might not like those things, and I'm okay with that. But there are things at the end of the day where I have to realize if I don't set expectations for my child, if I don't explain things, they're still going to come looking for answers. That doesn't give them this profound sense of, I can be whoever I want to be. Ultimately, it leaves them confused. It leaves them in a place where they perhaps feel freedom to choose, but they don't know which direction to turn. And don't mistake, parents, if your kid doesn't hear it from you, if they don't get affirmation from you as a parent, if they don't get encouragement or direction, they're going to seek it from somewhere. And there's a chance that they might come to Zach. There's a chance they might come to their small group leader. There's a chance they might go to somebody that you really don't want them to go to. So we want to make sure that you are aware and that we're supporting one another in this knowledge that we have a responsibility to set some of those expectations. So I think that cultural shift is having a very big impact on our kids because it's leaving them confused, and it's leaving them seeking sources that may or may not be good for advice on those types of things.
Yeah, Dr. Clark Chapp, I think, he wrote the Sticky Faith book, and he talks about in one of his lectures, how in the past it used to be this idea that it did take a village, your kid was my kid. Teachers didn't teach a subject, they taught kids, and that was the bottom line. The subject of what they were teaching was secondary to the fact that they were teaching kids. And, at a time where neighbors knew each other and all that kind of stuff. And now we're hyper individualized, and that I think contributes to that as well. And so,
I think so too.
Yeah, we don't know how to confront one another or how to help each other out when it comes to our kids. Now it's like oh well, that's their kid, they do their thing, and that just, it isn't healthy for anybody. There's no accountability with that.
Sure.
So technology has changed a lot in the last 10 years. Television, which originally was something that everybody would watch as a community at a certain time on a certain channel, has largely disappeared. It's now the idea of binge watching is encouraged, and so there's no end to streaming content. If you finish a show in a matter of days, then you can just pick up a new one. And honestly, the content in most of the shows out there is just not appropriate for kids, but it's there and they have access to it, so they're watching it.
And even then, content standards have changed so much. You can get away with so much more now on network TV, but even beyond that, it used to be when I was younger that if you didn't have a cable package, if you didn't have satellite, you didn't have to worry about your kids seeing people naked or seeing like graphic gore or things like that. But now with everybody having Netflix, there's no standard for that on Netflix. There's no standard for that on Hulu. Maybe you could have them go to a kids channel, but even the stuff that's on TV is just miles apart from what it used to be. And the things that used to be safe may or may not be safe anymore.
And because of the accessibility of technology and namely smartphones, there's no delayed gratification, which is a skill that we were taught as we were growing up. If we didn't have the money for something, or if if something wasn't out yet, or if it was out at Blockbuster, where you go and rent DVDs, like if somebody else had it, then you had to wait until somebody returned it. Now there is no such thing as delayed gratification. You want something, you can have it now. And if it's not on Netflix, it's probably on Hulu or Amazon Prime, or you can just stream it from iTunes, and just pay a couple bucks. So the fact that there is no more delayed gratification has affected students' ability to cope with being able to wait on something. And a lot of what we're called to as Christians is waiting on the Lord and waiting on His call in our lives, waiting, and without that being taught, then I don't know, it's just hard for kids to learn delayed gratification. It's even hard for me now, like if I want something and I want it now, we just ordered pizza before we started this live stream and we got it delivered within 10 minutes. So we're all part of this too, but our kids are growing up in a time where they didn't have to learn it as kids to be good at it at adults. Like they're just born into a world where there is no such thing as delayed gratification. So sorry.
I was just going to say, forgive me. I'm not like just being rude and texting under the table. I'm looking at my notes just in case you're curious. But I think the other thing, we're going to hit more on this later, but part of that kind of delayed gratification and the availability of technology that I think is a struggle is that kids are no longer forced to leave their home or to leave their phone in order to be social. They can hang out with friends on Fortnite. They can get on Facebook. They can, text each other. But the problem with that social interaction is that you have very little of the benefits of real social interaction, things like cooperation, like positive peer pressure. But
even just reading emotions on
absolutely,
face.
Yep,
yeah.
But even with that, you have very few of the positives, but you have almost all of the negatives still present. There's still negative peer pressure online. There's easier avenues for bullying, even than being in person. It's so easy to type out a comment, say something, and so
the anonymity of the screen.
Exactly. So there's social interaction, but it's not social, and that's becoming a replacement for true socialization, which is obviously not good for kids.
Which is like socialization is a legitimate need. But oftentimes our kids are fulfilling that legitimate need of socialization in an illegitimate way that doesn't actually satisfy what they need for nurturing and what they need for social developmental skills and all that kind of stuff. And part of that is kids are just naturally spending less time outside, which means they're vitamin D deficient, which is contributing to depression, and there's less exercise, and which also it means that their bodies aren't producing as many happy hormones. So that all contributes to it as well.
So I think none of these things are like earth-shattering for you. This is stuff that you probably already know, but we wanted to make sure that we set that groundwork of saying that we may not be able to address things now the same way that we have for years because the changes in culture have been so drastic and the changes in technology have been so drastic. But to kind of transition from there, we want to talk a little bit about some of the changes in your kids and some things that they're doing that are different maybe from things that you did when you were a kid or things that your parents did when they were kids. And I think the first one right off the bat is this. It's the phone. You've seen me doing it just now. I am checking notes right now. Believe it or not, I am participating in what we're doing. But even at that, even though I'm participating, my eyes have been below the table about half the time, which I know makes for a terrible live stream. But I'm also checking out the technology, making sure it works. But kids have these in their pockets everywhere they go. And if they're not in their pockets, it's because they're in their hands. I mean, how many kids do you know that leave home without a phone?
Yeah.
At least if they own a phone.
There's even like research done on like phantom phone syndrome, where you may not have gotten a notification, but you'll think your phone vibrated in your pocket, so you'll whip it out, and it's some researchers will say that this happens. For instance, in the time that we've been talking, that would have happened 6 times already. Like that, checking phones because they thought they felt something and it really wasn't anything. So, yeah.
So that clearly is a big one. And I think part of the struggle with that is that there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with having that phone in your pocket. Kids are constantly checking social media and seeing if their posts are getting liked. They're constantly looking for texts from friends. And culture has changed a lot even since I got my first phone. But I can remember even back then that if I would text, a girl that I liked or a friend of mine, maybe that we had like a weird interaction at school and I was trying to smooth things out or whatever, I'd text them, and then if they didn't text me back, I'm like watching the clock. It's been 4 minutes. It's been 6 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. Are they mad at me? And I think that's even bigger now because we have so many people have high-speed internet all the time. They have data on their phone. I think there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with having that phone in your pocket that parents don't really consider. And I think that it's also not considered how things like TV. We talked a lot about TV, especially, a decade or so ago. Parents talked a lot about how TV is not great for kids and it rots your brain. That's not a new topic. But like we said, TV, the content of TV has changed. The way TV is delivered has changed. The fact that you don't have to get up and come back in a week, that's new. And the problem is, at least kind of in my estimation, one of the struggles that parents have to work against is the mentality that there's good TV and there's bad TV. It's true, some TV is probably not great for your kids. Some things that are very violent, things that are very vulgar, things that you may feel uncomfortable with, those are easy to recognize. But there are also things that are, educational TV, things that teach good values. But even those programs are creating passive learners. When kids are watching TV, as we said earlier, they're not socializing. They're not manipulating.
They're not experiencing hands-on how to learn the way they would if they were in a class or something like that.
Yep.
It's passive, like you said, which is a big contributor to attention spans and all that kind of stuff.
And I think it's good to be aware of the fact that kids still need air. They still need actual socialization. They need to touch and feel. I know technology is a thing now. I'm sure tons of your kids have Chromebooks in their classrooms at school, or they have iPads, have a phone in their pocket right now. And technology is great. Believe me, that technology is helping us to do this right now. But we have to
not very successfully.
Sure, it's helping us attempt to do this right now. Currently, it says we're offline, so I apologize if we're just talking to the air.
We're recording this also, so we can post it later.
But I think, for me, it doesn't seem weird when I pick my kid up from daycare and come home and we turn on the TV and we watch 30 minutes. But then I think back and I realize that was just 30 minutes of TV time, but during the day, my kid probably did a Go Noodle. She did a couple Go Noodle videos. They watched a movie. They did whatever. And it can be easy for us to forget or to not remember, oh, hey, yeah, we did go to the grocery store after school and I gave my kid my phone for 30 minutes so she could do that. And that stuff really adds up. And it can be easy for us in the busyness of our lives to lose track of the decline of social interaction.
Yeah. There's also, we kind of mentioned this a little bit, but just the the fake social activities, the online kind of replacing the in-person. But with that comes FOMO, the fear of missing out. A lot of students don't, they'll see what their friends are doing, or where that other family went for vacation, or how many likes other kids are getting. A lot of this, actually, there's been a lot of research done on the amount of sleep that students are lacking now, because they're staying up late on their phones, on their screens, and the blue light is affecting their REM sleep, and how deep they sleep when they actually do go to bed, and it's affecting when they go to bed, and so they're tired, which means they're not absorbing half the stuff they're being taught at school. It just contributes to a whole lot more than just what we think on the surface. But all this mixed in with just like the busyness of everyday life, and all that kind of stuff. Kids don't know how to be bored anymore.
Yeah.
And I think there's something important about the ability to be bored, when you can let your mind just be still and silenced, and like you have to be creative, because you don't get creative when you're not bored.
Yep.
When you're bored, your creative juices start to flow. You start dipping into more critical thinking, and so your brain develops neural pathways that are making them develop better when they're bored, and our kids are just never bored anymore. So they're never challenged, they're never creative, and that can be some of the downfalls as well to some of the cultural changes that have happened over the last decade or two. So
Sure.
I think that definitely contributes.
Obviously, as parents, you can relate to not getting enough sleep. think about think about how it affects you. For me, I drink way too much coffee. As a symptom of me not sleeping enough. I love coffee, but then I get jitters. I get anxious. I get uncomfortable feeling. Or there's the flip side, where I'm not productive because I haven't gotten enough sleep. Where I'm grumpy with people, where I'm just not having positive interactions because of my lack of sleep. And that's so much more compounded when it's in a younger person, because they're still growing. For me, it's not inhibiting my growth. Believe me, I'm still growing just fine. Remember, we had pizza earlier. It's not inhibiting my growth, but it is inhibiting the growth of kids. It's inhibiting not only their physical growth, but the formation of mental pathways, their ability to process information, and even memory is impacted by lack of sleep. Because when you sleep, that's the point where your brain in REM sleep is processing and putting together the pathways that help you create longer-term memories and process data. Kids aren't doing that because they're on their phones. Or even if they're not, they're kept up being anxious about things that they're, don't have access to if they're not on their phone.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to kind of go into the diagnosing section here?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we want to hit on, and I think we touched on this a little bit a moment ago. Today's class is a little bit more kind of setting the foundation, not necessarily quite as like directly practical, here's things for you to do, but more setting the foundation for what we're going to talk about next time. But one of the things that we want to hit on is diagnosing mental health issues. Now, for me, being a kids minister, I don't feel like I see this probably quite as often as you do, but I do on a regular basis hear kids and young adults talking about their mental struggles or illnesses. They'll say things like, I just have so much anxiety. I'm so OCD. I'm really depressed. And I don't want to step on anybody's toes here. I know that this may be kind of an uncomfortable thing to say. I don't want to push boundaries. But Zach can do that in a minute. But I think that we as adults, not just parents, but adults interacting with kids, we like to use big dramatic language, and it can be easy for us to label things as mental illnesses when they're not. It's really easy when a kid comes to you and they're really anxious about something to tell them that they have anxiety. But anxiety is not really as common as we think. And I have to find where I wrote this down because it didn't update on my computer.
It's pretty common, but not in the clinical sense, the way that a lot of people treat it. So like a kid will start to experience stress because of school. That's the biggest one, which is some situational anxiety. But that doesn't mean they are clinically anxious people or that they need medication or anything like that. What it means is they're learning to cope with new stressors that just happens with life. And so our job as parents is to help identify some of those traits that might classify them as an anxious person, help them process it and give them tools to, and that's a lot of parents have come and seen me and brought their kids to talk to me about that specifically, also about depression. And it feels like over the last couple of years, like I studied this in school, but I had no idea how prevalent it was going to be. And I think it's gotten even worse since I graduated, if I'm honest.
Yep.
But students are experiencing real anxiety, but it may not be in the clinical sense. It may not be in the sense that like they need medical attention because of it. It may just mean, because school has become more challenging and they need to learn new ways to cope with it. Well, maybe they need to stop doing so much extracurriculars, because those have begun to be take a huge toll on students' schedules and stuff like that.
So do you have the book what's the title of the book that we pulled it from, the textbook?
So I have Understanding Abnormal Behavior and some other developmental psychology books from college.
The reason I ask, I want you to know we're not just pulling information out of the air. These are actual things that we've researched from actual textbooks.
These are the standards according to the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5. So that's what psychologists and counselors use when classifying mental health disorders. And so a lot of the standards for clinically diagnosing someone with something like depression or anxiety requires a 12-month window where they've been experiencing it on a constant or growing basis, not just like, the last couple months have been really difficult, have been having some anxiety.
Yep.
And some anxiety is to be expected. But I think our culture is so elevated the value of victimization, where like we are just kind of taught by our culture, like I am a victim, I'm experiencing this, and we're in our own heads and our own bubbles, and we don't see beyond ourselves because I'm the victim here, and we kind of blame everything else on blame what we're feeling on everything else rather than actually trying to go and cut in at the root of what is actually happening. And so when we do that, the reason we're spending so much time talking about like what a clear diagnosis is of a mental health condition is because when we play the victim and when we idolize victimization, then what we're doing, we're actually hurting the people who really are victims. It's a fight for attention, which again is a legitimate need, but we're trying to gain that attention in an illegitimate way. And I'm not saying that someone who claims to have anxiety or depression is trying to get attention, but what I am saying is there's a difference between experiencing some clinical conditions of depression or anxiety that need some medical attention and learning how to cope with some things without blaming your surroundings or your environment on your condition.
So research, and again, the textbook that I was referencing earlier is where we pulled this from, a college medical textbook. There are 5 fairly common types of anxiety that are diagnosed. Social anxiety disorder, specific phobias, agoraphobia, panic disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. Those are 5 of the most common types of anxiety that are diagnosed. And every single one of those, at the time that this textbook was written, had between a 1.5 and a 9.5% prevalence among the populace, meaning that none of those anxiety disorders affected even 10% of the population. So the things that we discussed earlier, the changes in culture, the changes in technology, those have caused the symptoms of anxiety to become more and more common. But actual clinical diagnosed anxiety is not as common as we sometimes label it. And I think that's important because we need our kids to understand that feeling anxious is not abnormal.
In fact, it's not even a bad thing necessarily. Right. I mean, God designed that in us because just like pain, it alerts the brain that you need to change something and take action because what you're doing now is causing pain.
Yep.
And anxiety is the same way. It triggers us to wake up and have a hyper focus on something.
Yeah.
And
Having a bad day, having a depressed feeling day, or even going through a season of depression-like symptoms is normal. And we want our kids to understand that you are not clinically diagnosable with depression just because you've had bad feelings. And
you're not a victim because of something you may be experiencing right now.
Yep.
You're encountering some parts of life that your brain is now starting to be able to handle in a different way.
Yep.
And so as parents, our job is to equip our kids with the tools that they need in order to overcome those sometimes overwhelming feelings of depression or anxiety.
Absolutely.
So that they can face the world and not be beaten down by it.
And I think one of the struggles is that when we label our kids with things that they may not necessarily have, it teaches them that those feelings are abnormal, and it encourages them not to explore those feelings and not to cope with those feelings.
Exactly.
Because they say, I can't help it, I have depression. I can't help it, I'm OCD or I have anxiety. When in reality, those are feelings that they need to learn to overcome. As they get older, as they transition out of high school, maybe being at home with parents, with family, and having some accountability, into college where accountability is much lowered, and then into being out on their own, they're going to suffer not only mentally but also in the workplace with their friends if they don't learn how to process and how to cope with those things. And saying, I have depression, sometimes that's true. That may be true. But for 90+% of our populace, it's not. And it's something that kids need to learn to overcome, and that we need to, as parents, we need to help them be equipped to overcome.
Yeah. And we don't say that to minimize what somebody's going through at all.
Yeah.
I hope we're not coming across that way. But we say that just because we care so deeply about this issue and about our kids being able to handle some of the stressors of life. And, probably all of us have experienced these feelings on more than one occasion. And so we really we want what's best for our kids, and we want to be able to equip them to be able to handle them.
Absolutely.
And often I think we jump to the medication side of things, or trying to counteract these feelings in certain ways, that we forget that there's a spiritual side to everything. And especially as Christians, we believe that we should be consulting the Spirit before anything else. And so a lot of times I feel like this is overlooked. And so I talked about this in a sermon like almost a year ago, I think. But there's been some research that's been done over the last couple of years where some neuroscientists have done brain scans of a control group of people who were not religious or whatever, and they asked them to pray and to meditate for 10 minutes a day, 6 days a week for 2 months. And at the end of that study, what they found was that the people who participated reported feeling less anxiety, better emotional health. They felt like they had a better understanding of who God is, and a better understanding of who they are in light of who God is. And there's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate, and that's the part of the brain that is needed to develop this active faith, and to be able to kind of balance the emotional side of things with the cognitive side of things from our prefrontal lobe and our amygdala. And so to be able to balance those in a way that allows us to have compassion for others, again, seeing beyond our own bubble, and to see from other people's perspective, that's the anterior cingulate at work. And the way that part of the brain is developed was through prayer and meditation. In fact, after those 2 months, every one of those brain scans showed that part of the brain had been developed by more than 50% in that time.
And when we talked about this, if I remember correctly, and you've been educated on that subject a lot more than I have, but when we talked about this, you said that people who had an equally developed or well-developed anterior cingulate, as well as their amygdala, had much greater mental health. They suffered a lot less from things like anxiety. So it seems, a lot of people, especially non-believers, may be quick to write off and say, hey, praying is fine. It's a placebo, but it doesn't actually affect things. But
it's
science disproves that.
Yeah.
So I think it is good to be aware, as you said. Be aware of the spiritual health, not only of your family, but of your kids as well.
Do you guys pray together, and not just before meals, but do you actually know what's going on in your kids' lives and be praying for them for certain things? And do you pray out loud together? It's kind of surprising sometimes. I'll sit with some students and I'll ask, if somebody wants to close us out in prayer, or we actually just recently went through a series on prayer with middle school, and I filled in as a small group leader for one of our guys that was out a couple times, and none of them prayed out loud ever and felt extremely uncomfortable doing that. And if as a family, are you teaching how to pray together, or are you learning or teaching them what it's like to have a devotion together and dig into God's Word and talk about spiritual things beyond just on a Sunday? Because that contributes largely to the mental health of our kids, I think, in ways that we sometimes overlook and underestimate.
So, like we said earlier, I think that goes through most of our talking points, but this again is more of a foundational course than the next one will be. Next one, we're going to try to provide some more kind of practical advice. But Zach, based on what we've talked about so far, if we were to offer some practical advice for parents to help address some of the things that we've talked about today, where would you begin? What is something that you think we could offer kind of practically?
I'm sorry, I was trying to check our connection.
You're fine.
Say that again.
I'll start. I was asking practical advice that we could give to parents. I think one thing that I would say as a bit of practical advice based on the technology side of things is to set clear time limits for your kids, even as they get older. One of the things that I resented my parents for as a kid and that now I really appreciate was that they set time limits for me. I had to, first of all, I couldn't even interact with technology until I had done my homework, or at least gotten started on my homework. And then beyond that, I only got 30 minutes of technology a night. As I said earlier, I'm a video gamer. It's my favorite hobby when I'm not doing church stuff or family stuff. And they only allow me to play 30 minutes a night. So I was careful about what I did and when I did it. There were different rules on the weekends and things like that as well, but for me, I hated that as a kid. I thought it was ridiculously unfair. I didn't understand why my friends didn't get that. But now, one of the greatest assets to me professionally has been some of my artistic things. I love doing graphic design, and that's helped me a lot. Even as a stress reliever, if I get anxious, if I get worked up, that's a great outlet for me. I never would have developed that had I been allowed to play video games as much as I wanted, because that's all I would have done. I played guitar. I used to sing a lot. I kind of have abandoned both of those things as I got older. There's only so much time. But I never would have learned those things had it not been for my parents setting some boundaries for me.
Boundaries are huge. And we're going to be talking a lot about that over the next few weeks when it comes to some of the practical things that you guys can do as parents in regards to the mental health of our kids. But also when it comes to technology, we'll be talking about boundaries a lot with that, as I'm sure you can imagine. But if I were to give you one piece of parting advice, it would be to stress that last point about make sure set a goal as a family, like that you don't go to bed until you have prayed together, or maybe in the morning you don't let your kids go to school and go out the door to their various activities until you have not just said a half-baked prayer to get them out of the door because it's routine, but like you stop what you're doing. Maybe you sit down at the breakfast table and just make sure that you pray together. Look up a Bible plan on YouVersion on the Bible app, and maybe go through one verse with your kids before they leave. If you go through Proverbs one chapter a day, then you can go through Proverbs every month, because there's 31 chapters. So look up a Bible plan or something. We'll talk about this more in the future too, but in all of our series for middle school and high school, and I think in kids, but I'm not sure, there is a corresponding Bible plan in the YouVersion app. So you just look up the series in the YouVersion app, and it'll come up for a way, maybe even as a family, that you can kind of learn with your kids and teach them and give them some little nuggets of insight that you have by going through the series plan in YouVersion that we're going through on Sundays. And it just adds to their experience on Sundays as well, and it adds to your experience as a family to be able to connect on a spiritual level and it not feel awkward.
So for kids, it's a little bit different. I don't know if there actually is a YouVersion plan for kids, but one of the things, I'm going to pull this up real quick just so that you can see. So if you follow Victory Kids on Facebook or on Instagram, our curriculum provides a lot of talking points that go along with what we're going over on Sundays. There's opportunities for you to, and I'm trying to find one of the links here, but it's a little trickier on the fly. I should have pulled this up ahead of time. But there are numerous resources that we offer through there that tell you not only what we're talking about on Sundays, but they give you some kickstarters to get you having more conversations with your kids about their faith. And actually, on that point, another thing that we wanted to show you, and I have a whole stack of these, are these parenting books. These are by Reggie Joyner and Kristen Ivy. Reggie Joyner is actually one of the founders of Orange and one of the people who, actually, I believe he's like the president. He's the guy who kind of runs Orange.
CEO.
There you go.
Person. Dude.
He and Kristen Ivy have put out a whole series of books all about the phases that your kids go through. And actually, right here with me, they have the older ones as well, but I'm the kids minister, so I have birth all the way up through 4th grade. There's a book for every phase that shows where your kid is going, and the things.
And they
that
made them
through.
all the way up through high school.
Yep.
So,
these
I don't have any of them in my office, but you can order them on Amazon.
Yes.
Or anywhere else.
And I would really advise getting some tools like that, and we're happy to help you with that. But again, like I said, follow us on social media. You'll get some of those links. Have those intentional conversations with your kids. And I think one last thing that I would say that I think we're probably going to say again next week as well is one of my favorite phrases, and that's "you're the parent." Society likes to kind of undermine parents.
Hands-off parenting.
Right. They want to take away authority from parents. They want parents to feel like they have to be a friend over being a leader or a guide. And they don't want us to set boundaries. But the Bible tells us to do the exact opposite. We're instructed on numerous occasions throughout the scriptures, not only to parent well, but to lead young Christians, to lead the church, to lead people outside the church into faith. We're taught over and over and over again to take charge and show leadership. And remember, you're the parent. Your kid may hate you for telling them that they can't play 95 games of Fortnite a night, but you're the parent. You have the ability to do that. And we encourage you, even if society tells you that it's not right for you to do those things, it's our job. It is our right as parents to do those things.
And if your emotional health, this is going to sound really, really harsh, but I've seen this too many times, but like if your emotional health as a parent is dependent on how your kid feels about you at all times, then that's probably not the healthiest place to be, because that's when we give in to the, I'll just let it slide this one time, or, I'll cave, and, I don't want them to hate me, and that's kind of what you're talking about there. That causes a lot of issues, I think. Absolutely.
Well, I think that only like a third of that was actually streamed. So probably when you're watching this, you're doing it in a pre-recorded video. So ordinarily at the end, we were planning on having some Q&A, but probably that's going to happen through you commenting on this video when it's posted or sending us messages, emails, however. But we hope that you'll take the time to respond to the things that we're talking about today. And we hope that you will mark your calendars for our part 2 of mental health coming up here very soon.
Yeah. All right. Until next week. Peace.
Bye.